Is he still in the fucking building? Abby.
No!
Abby, don't look.
Dad! Dad! No! No!
Oh, boo-hoo! Let me play a sad song for you on the world's smallest violin.
The Last of Us is one of those video games where the experience is driven by the story over its gameplay. The way it subtly builds both the world and its characters was genuinely interesting, and something that really hooks you in and motivates you to keep playing. The narrative that surrounded Joel's struggle for survival in this post-apocalyptic world is not what I consider a masterpiece of storytelling, but it still does a pretty good job showing you the narrative prowess that Naughty Dog is known for. It has a very interesting setting that shows how desperate people are to survive in this world, showing the steps they take and the new roles they practice to ensure survival. We see how hopeless things in this world are, but we also see glimmers of hope with people making an effort to rebuild civilization. But there's also a lot of danger lurking in every corner. It explores both the best and the worst of human nature in a world where morality is no longer present and it's kill or be killed. And yet, it still takes time to let people become familiar with its setting and cast in order to develop relationships with people who are worth protecting. I'm gonna be honest and say that if it wasn't for the storytelling of The Last of Us, I would have instantly dismissed it as another mediocre and boring third-person shooter, as a lot of its game elements have really not held up. The horrendous enemy AI, repetitive stealth, illogical item management, clunky swimming controls, unremarkable melee combat, the linear design of many of the areas. There's a lot of things about it that really didn't age gracefully. And yet for some reason, people still find themselves revisiting this game from time to time. Maybe it was the realism of people trying to survive in a world overrun by an infection followed by the collapse of civilization. Maybe it was the exploration of getting to see what life on Earth would be like after humans, with all sorts of vegetation and plant life overgrowing what was once thriving cities. Maybe it was just that desire to delve into that grayness of human nature, exploring what people are willing to do to survive. But I think what truly made this game work so well was how the story developed Joel as a character and his relationship with Ellie. The story of Joel Miller isn't anything new. A father who goes through a tragic loss but finds hope in his relationship with a stranger who ends up becoming family to him, as he struggles to survive in this harsh, unforgiving world. But it's told in a really massive and personal way that manages to leave an impact on the player. He's never portrayed as either a saint with a heart of gold or an unempathetic monster, just a person being driven to do bad things to survive. But as you go through the game, pieces of Joel's humanity begin to shine through more and more. And near the end of it, we see him trying to hold on to that humanity even as he has to keep making those decisions that question his morality. And nowhere is that conveyed more clearly than in his strong bond with Ellie throughout the experience. The surrogate father and daughter relationship between them is one of the most captivating that video games have hosted in recent years. There's a lot of examples that I can point to that support how well written this relationship is, but the two that I would go with most is the argument in Tony's ranch and when Joel comforts Ellie after she kills David. The argument details how deeply both Ellie and Joel have been affected by the apocalypse and the survivor's guilt they had to deal with over the years, with Ellie explaining how hurt she feels that Joel wants to get rid of her but relies on him for moral support, and Joel trying to distance himself out of fear from being hurt from the loss of a second daughter. It's an argument that delves into the difficulties they both have opening themselves up to other people, knowing they could be taken away at any time. And it comes full circle in the scene where Joel tries calming Ellie after she kills David. And the reason that it comes full circle is that we finally see how emotionally vulnerable both of them are, and how they've deeply grown to care about each other. Throughout the game, Ellie was trying to make herself out to be tougher than she actually is. She was capable, witty, sarcastic, and she swore a lot to come across as tough. But she always acted tough when someone else was around. And now she's in a situation where she's truly all by herself trying to survive. And her dark encounter with David has revealed to her just how unforgiving, sinister, and horrifying the world can be, further amplifying her fears of losing Joel as well as her own life. And when Joel finally finds and comforts her, she breaks down realizing the fullest extent of the horrors that Joel had to go through for the last 20 years. And she'll never be the same again because of it. But in that same moment of darkness, Joel gives her a glimmer of light through the way he comforts her, trying to calm her nerves and ensuring her he would keep her safe. And for the first time in 20 years, Joel was truly afraid of losing something, and he felt legitimately worried for Ellie. He grew to care for her as his own, and even calls her baby girl when trying to ease her stress, something that he only ever did for Sarah. When you look at these two scenes back to back, it really helps to explain what made the relationship between Joel and Ellie resonate so strongly with people. They show how human they are, how headstrong but vulnerable they are. They're not just a formulaic surrogate father and daughter, they're both fully realized characters, and it's their story that we follow throughout the game. Joel struggling to survive while looking for a reason to keep going, and Ellie trying to set things right for the world so that all the hardships and losses she went through would mean something. It's one of those very few times where it makes the rather mediocre gameplay worth it because the reward that you get for interacting with it is so captivating. For all of its flaws, The Last of Us is something that's really worth experiencing at least once, because it's something that explores what it means to be human in an intrinsic way. And it's why so many people find themselves talking about it over 5 years later, because its story is timeless. One that you can experience at any point in your life and still find it relatable. One that explores loss, redemption, relationships between people, and struggling with your humanity in a way that not a lot of games do. And for that, The Last of Us is a very special game that has really earned its reputation as one of the most beloved of all time. And I bring this up because I think it's important for people to know why people love the first game before we talk about the atrocious story of its sequel.
Joel, please get up!
See, there's a sequel. Wasn't as good.
I can already tell there's a bunch of people watching this and going, "Oh, but you can't review this game if you didn't buy it and test out the gameplay." Now, while it is true that I haven't tested out the gameplay of The Last of Us Part 2, I did take the time to watch the cutscenes. And considering that The Last of Us was a game driven solely by its story, I think it's a safe bet that I can use that to determine how thoroughly disgusting and offensive this game is, and why it deserves to be hated by everyone. The Last of Us Part 2 was the most emotionally manipulative, poorly paced, terribly written, retcon-infested, plot-contrived, character-assassinating, ass-pulling, and disrespectful continuations of a beloved series that disregards everything people loved about the original that I've ever had the misfortune of experiencing. And I sat through the Star Wars sequel trilogy. It's an ungodly mess of a plot that actively goes against good character and storytelling for the sake of meeting a feminist social justice warrior agenda, much like the Star Wars sequel trilogy. And today we're here to talk about why. So let's take a look at this abortion of a video game and find out how The Last of Us Part 2 is worse than you think. When the game was leaked and information on the plot was revealed, there wasn't too much to go on except some cutscenes and pinpoints on the plot. And while the leaks were legit, there was still the distinction that there was more to it than what was shown. And perhaps it won't be so bad when the game actually comes out. Well, it's out now, and the content is so much worse when you get the full context. First, let's talk about Joel. The way his character is actually killed off is so disrespectful and badly rushed that you get the sensation that Druckmann just wanted to get rid of him as quickly as possible for the sake of this horrible revenge plot. Now here's the thing. Joel dying is completely expected. I'm sure a lot of people thought he was going to die in this game. And Joel dying by itself isn't a bad idea. You can kill him, but it has to be done in a meaningful way or one that enhances the story. Maybe he heroically sacrifices himself to save Ellie. Maybe he starts to give in to old age and his health starts to fail, and Ellie is desperately trying to keep him alive. Something that gives proper respect to a character that a lot of people cared about. Nope, he's just arbitrarily killed off in literally the first 2 hours by some random trans figure we're supposed to care about. When I heard about Joel dying, I was kind of expecting it to happen like halfway through the game or maybe a third into the game. But no, they kill him in literally the first 2 hours. Killing him this early in such a half-assed way by the hands of a nobody that the audience has no connection with is not exactly what I call respectful. And the way he dies doesn't even make any sense. In the first game, Joel was an extremely cautious survivor. He could tell when someone was being deceitful, like those raiders in the city. He was extremely careful with who he gave his trust to, especially to complete strangers. On top of that, Joel and Tommy were really careful to not just give out their names to random people that they come across. Ellie says in the prologue that they had to take a lot of precautions to survive after the outbreak. You'd think that keeping their real names a secret would be one of those things. Given what we saw in the first game, Joel wouldn't just trust these random strangers so easily. He'd at least be a little bit suspicious of them. But no, apparently the guy whose motto in the original game was to not trust total strangers is now trusting total strangers by telling him his name and where he lives. This is really out of character for Joel to do, and it's even more insulting that this is exactly what gets him killed. And on top of that, it's a really long stretch when you consider the fact that Joel has been a hardened survivor for 25 years. This guy trained himself to be cautious of things like traps, ambushes, and situations exactly like like this for decades. He was a badass veteran who could take on groups of thugs and zombies, using his wits and his smarts to survive most situations. And this is how he's supposed to go out? Like a worthless nobody who's easily duped by a group of kids? That's just lazy. Who in their right mind decided that this would be a meaningful way to handle Joel's death? Offing him in literally the first 2 hours in a way that completely disservices his character, and rushing through it just so he can be tossed into the trash heap and forgotten about. And what makes it so disgusting is that it turns Joel into a shitty plot device. Not a character that people cared about in the first game. There's no meaning behind his death or how he gets killed. And there's no connection between him and Abby as characters. She's just a random woman who he doesn't know who just decides to kill him without an explanation. The least they could have done was have Joel put up some kind of fight. A last stand where he takes some of them down before Abby does him in. Something that shows how he's the same hardened veteran you controlled in the first game. Instead, he just lets his guard down like an idiot, gets shot in the kneecaps, and beaten to death with a golf club without fighting back. He doesn't get any meaningful final words, he doesn't get a chance to talk to Ellie before he dies, he doesn't even get to have a scene with her before getting killed. It's one thing to kill Joel, but the way they actually kill him off leaves you feeling absolutely nothing. The circumstances surrounding it are so painfully contrived, and the pacing is so horribly rushed that it just feels worthless. Joel is simply not a character in this game. He's literally a plot device for motivating Ellie's revenge. And if that's not enough to convince you, take a look at this scene. Yeah, remember the one where Joel follows Ellie into the wilderness and tells her you'd think I'd let you do this on your own? Well, fuck you, because in the actual game, it's some other dude who follows Ellie into the wilderness, and he's the one who asked that to Ellie. They literally lied to you about him playing an important role in the story just for the sake of subverting your expectations. Yeah, because it worked so well when Rian Johnson did it. And this actually feeds into a huge middle finger that this game pulls off. The way it was marketed. Everything about every single trailer was used to advertise this game in a way that was very specific to deceive you and lie to you about what it was actually gonna focus on. Remember the trailer that got everyone hyped, where Joel asks Ellie if she's really gonna go through with this? Remember all the trailers that showed Ellie in a relationship with Dina, before showing trailers where they make it look like she's the one who's gonna get killed and Ellie's gonna avenge her death? And with all the trailers they put out, did you ever notice how suspiciously they tried to hide Abby's portion of the campaign? Yeah, there's that one trailer where everyone thought she was Ellie's mom for I have no idea. But aside from that, the way Naughty Dog advertised this game was thoroughly and completely dishonest. They actively lied to people about what this game was really gonna be about. Joel playing an important role in the story was a lie. Expanding on the relationship between him and Ellie was a lie. Abby not being the new protagonist was a lie. Dina being the one who dies in the prologue was a lie. And to make up such lies about Joel's presence in the game and how the plot revolves around his death just feels really dirty. They had to have known that the actual plot was gonna piss people off. Why else do you think they try to hide it? They literally tried to trick you into selling shit, and whoever leaked the fucking thing actually did a service to the public. Again, it's not that Joel dies at all, it's how he dies, and how it completely depraves him of his character and cheapens his relationship with Ellie. He literally exists just to be killed and drive Ellie's petty motivation for revenge. And any appearances he makes in flashbacks don't matter because they don't resonate with this plot. This story was said to be done in a way that pays great respect to Joel and Ellie, but I don't see anything respectable about what happens to either of them in this game. With Joel getting killed off in the first 2 hours by some nobody, and then have that nobody be the new protagonist that you control while brutalizing Ellie. Is this really what you actually want out of a sequel for the story of the first game? To see the two characters that you were meant to care about and sympathize with being turned into the villains, while glorifying this freak of nature as sympathetic? Fucking insulting. The Last of Us was about Joel and Ellie. It was about their hardships and their struggles to come out of it as better people. And now you're making it about some shitty revenge narrative where you have to play as the character who brutally murders Joel and beat the shit out of Ellie and her pregnant girlfriend. And we'll get into more of that later. But for now I just want to ask, what the fuck did you do to Ellie in this game? Ellie in the first game was a great and lovable character. One of the reasons why people loved the first game so much was because it was their goal to keep her safe, and her development made accomplishing that goal a satisfying experience. She was funny, witty, a smart aleck with a smart mouth, curious, upbeat, sweet, and adorable. And she was also just as human as Joel with moments of fear and weakness. She had a fun and likable personality that made you want to spend time with her. But in this game, you just feel really, and I mean really, uncomfortable around Ellie. All of her personality has been completely stripped away. turning her into a revenge-obsessed idiot. She acts like the biggest edgelord throughout this entire game, and it's not fun to control a character with such a bleak and shallow personality. And if you want to say that this is a legitimate reaction from someone who saw a loved one getting brutally murdered, that doesn't justify Ellie's character being so unlikable. I mean, it's one thing to want to avenge Joel's death, but she just goes on a blind murderous rampage. Every scene with Ellie in this game, her extremely aggressive behavior, every line of dialogue that comes out of her mouth, she's a goddamn psychotic. I mean, holy shit. None of the stuff Joel did in the first game was even remotely close to being as grim and horrifying as the stuff Ellie does in this game. And in spite of her being the hero that we're supposed to sympathize with, they take every route that you can possibly think of to make her look as evil as possible. Abandoning Dina and her newborn baby, killing dogs, threatening people who had nothing to do with Joel's death, and to top it all off, she even kills a pregnant woman, and the game never bothers to focus on that. This should have been the moment where Ellie ultimately decides that her revenge wasn't worth it, because she ended up killing an unborn baby in blind rage. If you want to make Ellie sympathetic, make this the moment where she realizes revenge will eventually turn you into a monster. Not that retarded excuse for an ending, and trust me, we're gonna get to that later. Even outside of the whole grim dark revenge stuff, the way Ellie is characterized throughout the game just feels wrong. In the intro, she turns down a very genuine apology from someone who was humbly admitting that they were acting inappropriate, but she doesn't forgive him and calls him a bigot. Which begs the question, how does she not know what an ice cream truck is yet knows what bigot means? Her attitude comes across as highly entitled and unappreciative, and she's also incredibly stupid as she's too busy smoking weed and making out with Dina to do her job, or even notice that something happened to Joel. She's a dumb twat who acts highly principled and too much like a sulky teenager, and throughout the game she does nothing but mope and complain. And they also made her really, really stupid. When talking to Tommy about going after Abby, he brings up some very good points as to why she shouldn't just go running off on her own, and she's just like, whatever. And in her first fight with Abby, the way that you beat her is to catch her from behind enough times to subdue her. Not only is this lazy, but it's really out of character for Ellie. I just find it really hard to believe that with all she's experienced that she would be easily duped by Abby like this repeatedly. And she's just boring. Like, incredibly boring. You took one of the most unique characters in the first game, took out all of the things that made her fun, and made her into a dumbass on a revenge kick. Not to mention depraving her of her humanity and trying to make her look as evil as possible just to make Abby look good in comparison. And the Ellie that we grew to love in the first game simply wasn't like this. Ellie was just so much more interesting in the first game because her character was given more to work with. She was a real kid who forced herself to grow up in a harsh environment. She was empathetic but also really tough. She was just as flawed and vulnerable as Joel, which gave the player something to relate to. Even in the Left Behind DLC where she's forced to look over Joel while remembering her past life with Riley, they showed how she was becoming a hardened survivor and took experience from Joel, but they also took the time to portray her as a real kid. Someone who's just trying to get some fun and enjoyment out of this grim post-apocalyptic world. All of her interactions with Riley were so well written and charming. We got to see a more free-spirited side of her before she started grieving over her friend's death. And even after Riley's death, she never became a depressed emo and still kept herself upbeat and snarky. But Ellie in this game is like a female version of Sasuke Uchiha. She's just miserable, unpleasant, and all around unenjoyable to be around. This isn't like Kratos, where his quest for revenge was interesting because they took the time to delve into his character and what drove him to be a ruthless warrior, and God of War took the time to delve into his humanity, like where he acknowledged that he was horrible and offers to atone by murdering himself. In comparison, Ellie never gets a moment where she's struggling with some sort of humanity, and even when they try to do something like that, it ends up getting wasted as she just reverts into being an edgy idiot. And even if you put all that aside, I still can't think of anything to like about Ellie in this game because there's nothing to like. And that's the main problem with Ellie's character. It has no substance. She's nothing more than a revenge-obsessed freak in a game where every other character is already a revenge-obsessed freak. She doesn't even stand out as a unique character. She's the same miserable piece of shit as everybody else. All because they wanted to make a shitty story about the cycle of revenge and how bad it's supposed to be. Even if that's the story they wanted to go with, they didn't even succeed in making it work. First of all, they don't even do anything new, interesting, or unique with this revenge plot. It's the exact same by-the-numbers story that you've seen so many times. And it's also been done so much better in other forms of media. So right off the bat, the story is already suffering from being incredibly formulaic and predictable. Not that the first game was unpredictable, but they still added some twists and turns that helped it stand out from other zombie apocalypse stories. This shitty revenge plot is as painfully cliched and unremarkable as you can possibly get. Nothing nothing new, nothing interesting, and nothing that helps it stand out, which just makes it boring to play through. And even if you're not bothered by the lack of originality and predictable writing, the revenge narrative still doesn't work because everything about it completely conflicts with the story from the first game. Remember how it ended with Joel putting his relationship with Ellie over humanity getting another chance? And how it split the fanbase on whether or not he made the right decision? That's what made it work so well. The tone of the first game was entirely about moral ambiguity, so ending it with Joel being a morally ambiguous character was a brilliant way to wrap up the story. You could make the argument that Joel is unlikable for preventing humanity from getting a cure, but you can also make the argument that he saved Ellie from a group of terrorists with no guarantee that they'd actually get a cure. And not only does it bring Joel's morality into question, but it also leaves you, the player, asking if you would have done the same thing. Would you be willing to sacrifice humanity's second chance to save your child? Would you be willing to sacrifice someone important to you to save the world? It brings up the psychology of not just Joel, but also the player. It's actually really interesting when you think about it, as it stands for rationality versus irrationality, an ending that actually makes people reflect on themselves. And here comes the sequel to just shit all over that. Not only is Joel killed, but he's swiftly killed in the most brutal and depressing way possible in literally the first 2 hours of the game, as Ellie begs and pleads for his life. And then after that, you're forced to play a good chunk of the game as Joel's murderer, and you're also being forced to sympathize with her. And the cherry on top of this retarded sundae is that while controlling her, you have to smash Ellie's face in while being tempted to slit the throat of her pregnant girlfriend. That's a load of fucked up we'll get to later, but the context that I'm getting from this is that by taking control of Abby, killing Joel, and beating the shit out of Ellie, you are actively retconning the message that you were sending to people with the first game. You're telling them that what Joel did was 100% objectively wrong, and that Ellie is completely wrong for wanting to avenge her father figure. No moral ambiguity, no self-reflection, no questioning your choices, just generic good versus evil that turns Joel and Ellie, the characters that you were supposed to side with in the first game, into the villains for Abby's story. The Last of Us Part 2 doesn't let you think about Joel's decision. Instead, it wants to think for you. It wants you to hate Joel and Ellie because it wants you to side with Abby 100%. And really, why the fuck would I want to side against Joel and Ellie when The Last of Us is entirely about Joel and Ellie? Making it about the cycle of revenge completely invalidates the plot of the first game because it doesn't fit the established tone of the franchise. The Last of Us was a personal story about Joel and Ellie's relationship. What made the first game so special was because of how it revolved around them. We saw everything unfold from their perspective. We were put in their shoes. Their journey is the one that we followed, so obviously people are gonna care if the sequel is suddenly telling us that we have to beat the shit out of them. The first game was about the growth of a surrogate parent and child, building a family and finding a second chance in a world depraved of hope. Making the second game about revenge is just so out of left field, and it doesn't fit with the first game at all. It literally feels like a completely different story rather than a continuation. But if you really want to, let's forget about the first game for a second and try to see this narrative on its own. And even then, it's still crap. It's pretty obvious to tell what they were going for here, trying to make Ellie and Abby the villain of each other's story, to make a scenario where two people would eventually become monsters in pursuit of revenge. The problem is that the way that it's paced and the way that it writes its characters are so terrible and impossible to relate to. If you want a revenge story to be good, you have to make us root for the characters trying to get revenge. But both Ellie and Abby are too unlikable for the player to sympathize with. And when you really look at it, the cycle of revenge isn't even a factor for half the game, because after killing Joel, Abby isn't being driven by revenge. Her portion of the campaign is completely detached from the incident with Joel and Ellie and holds no relevance to the actual plot. If you want Abby's story to fit into the revenge plot, then we should be controlling her at the start of the game right before her father dies. And instead of just teleporting to the part where she kills Joel, have us control her on her journey to Jackson. That way you might have been able to develop her character a bit more, and give her something to gravitate to. Show her coping with her father's death and learning about the events that led to it. And the message that they're trying to send about how revenge is bad and hurts everyone involved doesn't register because the story is incredibly biased in favor of Abby while shitting over Ellie. Abby got to have her revenge on Joel and she doesn't suffer any consequences for it. She gets out of this completely unscathed and gets to walk away with her friend Lev. Meanwhile, Ellie gets abandoned by her girlfriend, gets her fingers bitten off, ends up completely alone, and isn't able to play her guitar anymore. And she never even got her fucking revenge by letting Abby live. This is supposed to be a game about how revenge is bad, but Abby got everything that she wanted with no repercussions. And in spite of Ellie having every right to have revenge on the person who brutally killed her father figure, she gets demonized and ends up with nothing at the end of the story. Abby is portrayed as such a piece of shit that it makes you want to see Ellie get her revenge even more. And seeing them cop out of it at the last possible second in such a stupid way is just horrible writing. Abby doesn't even learn anything about revenge being bad because she never comes to that conclusion on her own. She was prepared to slaughter both Ellie and Dina and only stopped because Lev told her not to do it. Ellie is entirely right, and yet she's the one who gets the short end of the stick when Abby is such a remorseless psycho. And even beyond that, the motivations are so poorly established and the deaths just feel meaningless. Anyone who cared about the first game is not gonna want to be in control of the character who murdered Joel and then go on to brutalize Ellie. And because of how randomly and horribly Joel is killed, his death is just an afterthought. It means nothing except being a forced motivation for Ellie. On some level, I could see this working as a revenge story if they did enough to make us empathize with Ellie and Abby. Something that makes us want to get their revenge for them. But no, it's just killing each other for the sake of killing each other. And hello, wasn't this series about surviving the zombie apocalypse? With all this talk of revenge and having the story revolve around Ellie trying to kill Abby, the infected aren't even an organic presence in this game. You might as well cut them out of the game entirely because now it's about fighting other groups of people, which quite frankly makes this game way more uncomfortable than it should be. Oh yeah, we're getting into the really disturbing stuff now. You know that theory going around that the developers had to watch videos on LiveLeak and simulate the graphic imagery to make the game look as violent as possible? I don't know if it's true, but it's definitely a possibility. The violent content in this game is, well, there's no other way of putting it. It's fucking horrifying. I mean, the first game had some violent stuff in it too, but they were able to keep it at some sort of modest level. Joel wasn't motivated by revenge or killing every last one of them, he was motivated by survival and protecting Ellie. And the violent imagery never got so grim and graphic to the point that it made you feel uncomfortable. But in this game, not only did they make the violence against the other humans violent, they made it Final Destination levels of graphic. And because Ellie's motivation isn't survival or protection, but instead to kill every last one of them, the tone of the violence becomes all the more horrific and disturbing. You literally feel like you're in control of a serial killer. Not only can you kill people in this game, but you can take your time killing them slowly and horribly. And the way that it's presented is very unpleasant. Enemies actually limp and fall to the ground in a really realistic manner while screaming in agony holding onto their dismembered body parts. And for good measure, their allies call them by name in a traumatized fashion and demonize you in a despairing tone. In games like Doom, God of War, and Wolfenstein, the enemies were mindless monsters and genocidal maniacs, so you weren't expected to feel bad about killing them in violent ways. These are people who had nothing to do with Joel's death. They're just protecting their territory and searching the area, so killing them by the numbers in such brutal ways just feels meaningless. And you think that would be bad enough, but they actually take it a step further and give you the option to do all of that twisted and demented shit to dogs. Yeah, because slaughtering dogs left and right as a psycho on a revenge kick is definitely what people want in a Last of Us sequel. It was one thing to kill dogs in Wolfenstein because they're literally Nazis who are trained to slaughter innocent civilians and eat human flesh. Even in games like Call of Duty it's understandable because they're trained by the opposing military and you have no choice but to defend yourself. These dogs aren't Nazis or military trained. They're just being protective of their owners and scouting the field. And the fact that the game allows you to kill them in any way you want with no scruples is absolutely sadistic. You don't just shoot them in the head or beat them with melee weapons, you set them on fire. Fucking fire! What demented fuckhead would actually want to do something like that? Maybe this is just my personal bias as a dog owner, but I find it extremely fucked up that the game not only allows you to freely kill dogs in horrifying ways, but also tries to pull this bullshit finger waving and demonize you for playing by its rules. There's even a moment in the story where you brutally stab Ellie's dog to death. Yeah, I'm gonna brutally murder an innocent animal that had nothing to do with Joel's death. That'll show that evil Abby person a thing or two. For Christ's sake, she killed a dog that didn't do anything but its duty as a guard dog. I can understand Ellie defending herself, but when the game switches to Abby's perspective, they want you to hate her for doing exactly that. With the way they implemented dog killing into this game, it's like they just wanted to further antagonize Ellie to make Abby look like the good guy. After a while, the game stops being about revenge and turns into a story about mass murder. Remember when Hatred came out and everyone rightfully called it out for being a disgusting excuse for a game with the main character being a murder-happy edgelord who slaughters people with no purpose or reason? Yeah, that's exactly what this game feels like. Just meaningless slaughter with no motivation. I didn't think it was possible, but they managed to make a game more edgy and try-hard than that shitty Devil May Cry reboot. It's meaninglessly violent and cruel, it tries to make you feel as uncomfortable as possible with the agonizing NPCs and dog killing, and it makes Ellie less of a relatable character trying to avenge her father and more into a bloodthirsty serial killer in a failed attempt to make Abby more heroic in comparison. And that's not even including the compilation of cringe-inducing content in this game, like the bigot sandwich scene.
What you got there?
Bigot sandwiches.
They fly now? They fly now!
Are you seriously telling me that Ellie didn't know what an ice cream truck is, but is somehow knowledgeable enough to know what a bigot is? Who the fuck even talks like that in the zombie apocalypse? And in an environment where good food is scarce, she doesn't even take the fucking sandwiches. This is just an entire other level of cringe. Then you have that stupid scene in the weed lab where they come across a porn stash where one of the movies is called... Oh god, I can't even bring myself to say it, just listen.
Smash Brandy's cooch.
Oh yeah, that's some brilliant top-notch writing, guys. Uncharted 4 had an entire minigame where you actually played a level of Crash Bandicoot, and it was actually a really good reference and a great nod to Naughty Dog's golden years. And now you've gone down to the level of referencing him via porn title. What fucking disrespect. You also have that stupid conversation between Ellie and Jesse, which is just shitty exposition, and then they have this really awkward conversation about how Dina kissed Ellie before he comes out and says it was just a joke. What kind of puke-inducing high school drama is this? Who would even want that in a sequel to The Last of Us? And then you have the cringe-inducing sex scene with Abby. I wish I was making this up, but this is real. Neil Druckmann wanted you, with a straight face, to watch Joel's murderer having transsexual intercourse with her ex-boyfriend immediately after a conversation about torturing people and cutting them up until they cry. And to top it all off, this scene was actually motion captured. Fucking seriously? People actually greenlit this. Neil Druckmann wrote his disgusting, cringe-inducing fetish fantasy into the script, and they said, yes, yes, this is what The Last of Us needs. A sex scene with the muscle-bound freak who brutally murdered Joel in front of Ellie. What the fuck is wrong with you? I could actually go on and on with this game's cringe factor and all the other failed attempts that they have at being humorous, but then we would be here all day and I really don't give a shit. Even when the game isn't being edgy try-hard grittiness, it's still unwatchable because the dialogue and the way the characters interact are so tasteless and pathetic that it feels like you're watching a horribly written fanfiction. Actually, that's not a fair comparison because there's literally fanfiction with better writing than this garbage excuse for a sequel. There's just so many moments where Ellie is completely out of character, and other moments where the rest of the cast are annoying idiots. Any random fan of the first game could have been picked to write the sequel for this game, and I guarantee that they would have come up with something better than what we actually got here. And they certainly wouldn't have come up with a story where we're forced to spend half of the game sympathizing with Joel's murderer. Hey, you remember that random surgeon that you killed at the end of the first game? Did you care about him at all? No, nobody did. But now you have to because it turns out that random surgeon was actually Abby's father. You heard right. That random NPC that no one gave a shit about 7 years ago was her father. And now we have to sympathize with Abby because of it. That is fucking lazy. It would be one thing if Abby had a connection to a key character like Marlene or maybe even David. But no, it's just some random NPC. Seriously, you could have taken any of the NPCs from the last game and say they were Abby's father and it would have made about as much sense. Imagine if Uncharted 5 was about one of the goons Drake killed having a daughter who tracks down and kills him, and then you spend half the game playing as that character fighting his wife and daughter. That's how stupid this idea is. Almost as stupid as the way that Abby is actually designed. I mean, just look at this thing. It is so unbearably ugly. I actually took some time to look up the inspiration for Abby's design, and apparently she's modeled after this woman named Colin Fudge. But even if that's true, they absolutely failed because these two look nothing alike. Abby's physique is just so uncanny and disproportionate. Her chest is larger than the rest of her body, which just looks unnatural, and look at those muscles. I know that muscles tend to be wide, but those things are just so cartoonishly larger than her head. Who the hell would okay a design like this? It's just so cringy and wrong. Well, apparently they wanted Abby to be as muscular as possible because the motivation was making the female characters less feminine in order to appear trans-friendly. Seriously, trans-friendly. I don't have anything against trans people, let me make that very clear, but something about this just feels really wrong. I mean, in the original trailer where Abby was revealed, she actually looked a lot better. She was muscular, but her body was more natural. Her muscles are properly tuned, and her chest wasn't so cartoonishly large. It would have been completely okay to keep Abby's model like this. But somewhere along the way, Neil Druckmann decided that he wanted everything about Abby to be bigger. And I mean really bigger. And not only is this design ugly as hell, it's lazy. Maybe it's just me, but when I first saw Abby's reveal trailer, I actually thought that she was Ellie. I don't know, just something about the way her face is modeled and the way her body is built. It sort of looked like how Ellie would look if she started lifting weights. She could literally just pass as a bigger and more muscular Ellie. And it's such a strange decision that it makes you ask why they would do that. Why the hell would Neil Druckmann take an already okay design for Abby and just want to make it into this muscle-bound freak?
More specifically, I'm talking about our female characters. And whether we want to admit it or not, these are role models. And yet we sexualize, we objectify, we marginalize, and we reduce these female characters to a lot less than they can be. And this is coming from a guy that almost made a really misogynistic game. So I kind of know what I'm talking about. So once this thing failed and I had this awakening, almost exactly at the same time, this Kickstarter happened about the tropes versus women in video games.
Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs!
Okay, so apparently Neil Druckmann took inspiration from Anita Sarkeesian, taking her presentation on how female characters are represented, and tried to make Abby as non-feminine as possible while also doing so in the name of making her appear trans-friendly. You know, the same woman who tried to preach to us about the euthanized damsel? I never thought I'd have to say this in a Last of Us review, but you should never ever allow Anita Sarkeesian to have any sort of influence on your game. That's not even lesson 1. Hell, that's not even lesson 0. And Neil Druckmann was somehow stupid enough to allow her to be involved. Seriously, everything about Abby's appearance is exactly the kind of thing that Anita Sarkeesian would have a wet dream over. A female character depraved of any and all feminine traits, making her as muscular bound as possible, and then saying that this character is supposed to be friendly to trans people. Everything about Abby's design is just a man's body with a woman's head attached to it. Hell, they didn't even bother to give her boobs. Those are the kind of pecs that you would see on Dwayne Johnson. There are literally female bodybuilders in real life with more boobs than this thing. Is this what Anita Sarkeesian thinks women should look like? Is this what Neil Druckmann thinks women should look like? Because everything about this design and the motivation behind it makes me very genuinely concerned. You took a female character, made her look as non-female and manly as possible to be more appealing to trans people, and then you put that character in a sex scene. Then you have that character used as a vessel for beating the living shit out of 2 lesbians, one of which is pregnant, and then have that character try to slit the pregnant one's throat. If you were going for representation, I'm pretty sure that's not the right way to do it. Hell, the lesbians that Abby is brutalizing are literally half her size. And Abby's inclusion in this game gets even worse even when you take all of that out. Even without the muscular body or the unfortunate implications of having a symbol for trans people beating the shit out of 2 lesbians, she's still horrible. Why? Because her inclusion completely ruins the story. Sequels tend to include new characters all the time while pushing them as the new protagonist, but The Last of Us Part 2 does it especially badly. This character that the audience has literally no connection with is suddenly supposed to be a big deal because they kill Joel before the end of the prologue, and in spite of the game making her as despicable as possible, suddenly halfway through, with no warning, you have to play as and sympathize with her. They are saying straight to your face that you should want to hurt Ellie as this person, and that Ellie is completely in the wrong for wanting to avenge her father figure. What brain-dead bullshit is this? Oh yeah, I can't wait to play as the new character who brutally murders the protagonist I cared about from the first game while brutally beating his daughter and threatening to slit her girlfriend's throat. Isn't that what everybody would want in a sequel to a beloved game? I'm sorry, but you're a fucking idiot for defending this. There is no way that you can see this as anything but a massive fuck you to anyone who cared even remotely about the first game. Making you play as Abby, having her torture and kill Joel, and then having Ellie be a boss fight where you brutally smash her face in, while still trying to make her look like the good guy in all this? That is literally a middle finger to The Last of Us fans. People who spent the entire first game caring about Joel and Ellie and wanting to see their relationship being explored more. Why is Ellie suddenly the villain for being justified in wanting to kill Abby? Why are we supposed to care about this random character who horribly killed and threatened Ellie's family? Because that stupid surgeon was her dad? This is like if if they made a Mario game and all of a sudden Bowser Jr. kills Luigi and you spend the rest of the game playing as him while fighting Mario and Peach. And it didn't even have to be this bad. On some level, I might have been okay with playing as Abby if they actually did something to make her sympathetic, but spoiler alert, they don't. In fact, they really double down on how heinous she is. You thought it was bad with the out-of-context leaks? Well, it gets a lot worse from there. Abby was getting attacked by infected. She was literally seconds away from death when Joel saved her. Then him and Tommy team up to protect her and get her back to her group safely. They were even nice enough to offer to help the group stock up on supplies before heading out. And after all of that generosity, what does Abby do? No! She shoots the kneecaps off of someone who just saved her life, then proceeds to brutally torture him and murder him in front of his daughter as she begs and pleads. I am dead serious. This just happened. And after all of that crap, we're supposed to sympathize with Abby? What the fuck is wrong with you? This is something that a villain would do, not the hero of the story that you're supposed to be rooting for. It would have been one thing if Abby had some sort of conflicting feelings about it, but she does all this without hesitation. Oh, and just to make it even better, she shoots him in the knee before even asking for his last name. Like, holy fuck. Was Abby just prepared to do all of this fucked up shit to any rando whose name happened to be Joel? That is actually really scary to think about. Like, could you imagine if they ended up getting the wrong Joel?
Joel Miller.
What? No, I'm not Joel Miller, I'm Joel Schumacher. There is literally no getting around that. You don't have the sympathetic protagonist literally torture and kill someone like this in front of a loved one. And the added context just makes her even more villainous. She was traveling the country for people named Joel with the intent of slaughtering them without hesitation, with no intention of making sure she even got the right Joel. Not only that, but she does this even after he saved her life. The character kills them because their selfish motivation is supposed to be more important than the selfless act of the person who is being humble to them. What exactly about this is supposed to make her sympathetic? And even from a dramatic standpoint, the scene doesn't even work. It's already rushed beyond belief, but what makes it even worse is how there's no build-up. This is the kind of scene you're supposed to do with characters who know each other or are familiar with each other. But Joel doesn't even know who any of these people are. And because there's no established connection between any of these characters, there is no tension. It's just Joel randomly getting ambushed and killed. This is like if Wolverine got killed by a random thug in Logan. It simply doesn't add up. And after all these disturbing implications, I'm supposed to feel bad for Abby because her father died and they freed a zebra a couple of hours earlier. Look, I'm sorry if this is gonna sound harsh, but in this couple of minutes of Abby spending time with her dad, we're never given a real reason to like him. And our time with him is so brief that the audience isn't even able to establish a connection with him. It's just, oh, he's an animal lover who saved a zebra, and that's it. And on top of that, Abby's father is kind of a dick. I mean, I get that he's trying to make a cure, but he's clearly trying to rush the situation without considering anyone else about the tough decision. Marlene is clearly uncomfortable with the idea of sacrificing Ellie for a cure, and yet he's really passive-aggressive about pressuring Marlene into just accepting it. He doesn't even suggest they wait till Ellie wakes up to give her a choice. He's completely okay with sacrificing a teenage girl for a vaccine. And the way he asks why Joel should be told about this just makes him look really terrible. He's literally saying that Joel doesn't deserve to know about sacrificing Ellie in spite of the huge possibility they developed a close relationship over the past year. So aside from having very little screen time and personality, he's also being a huge dick about sacrificing a teenage girl and not telling her surrogate father. And because of how quickly he comes and goes, it comes across as an extremely weak motivation for Abby's revenge. This is why Abby should have been playable before they got to Jackson. We could have gotten some flashbacks with her dad that would better explore the connection between the two instead of it just being an excuse to kill off Joel. Are there other reasons to feel bad for Abby? Well, none that I can think of, because given her quarters, she's got a much better life than like 90% of the rest of the people in this post-apocalypse. Seriously, in every other location we've seen in this series so far, they were rotting and failing structures with hardly any sustainable living space. In comparison, Abby has a luxury living space, a library with hundreds of books, high-quality food, and a gym. A fucking gym. In a world where everyone is struggling for survival, Abby and her people are living incredibly privileged lives. Why should I feel bad for her? She's got it better than the rest of the human race. And her campaign is just really boring to sit through. For the entire 5-hour experience, we never learn anything more about Abby as a character, and her story is completely detached from the revenge plot for this shitty faction war. Her personality is as bland as unbuttered toast, and so many of the characters she interacts with are dismissed as quickly as they're introduced. Let me tell ya, did you really give a shit about what's-his-face or whoever this broad was like you cared about Tommy or Tess? Did you really give a shit about Mel and Owen in the same way you cared about Sam and Henry? The story never puts time into developing any of these characters, so they're just cannon fodder for Ellie to kill and aggress Abby. And even after watching all her friends die, I still don't care because they continue to make her an incredibly unlikable character. When the time comes for her to battle against Ellie and she gets attacked by Dina, she's told directly by Ellie that she's pregnant and had nothing to do with the deaths of her comrades. And then, after being told that Dina had nothing to do with Ellie's revenge, and that she's pregnant, she actually threatens to slit her throat. And not only is she threatening to slit her throat, she was going to take pleasure in doing it specifically to spite Ellie. That's despicable. Abby is an actually despicable person, and she doesn't even stop on her own accord. She only doesn't go through with it because Lev told her no. This is why the game trying to get you to sympathize with Abby doesn't work. She's portrayed as highly sadistic, showing a willingness to repeatedly kill innocent people, and yet the game is still trying to send the message that she's sane. She's just as bloodthirsty and vicious as, if not more so than Ellie, and they still want you to see her as the good guy. So aside from being unrelatable for having a crappy motivation and personality and outrageous design, she's not even sympathetic on any conceivable level. She's not even morally gray. She's a psychotic nutcase, and the game presents this in a way that's impossible to ignore. They tried characterizing her as sane during her half of the campaign, so she clearly has an understanding of what's right and wrong. And here she is, threatening to slit a pregnant woman's throat and taking solace in doing it. I don't give a fuck if you have a tragic backstory. That is evil and an irredeemable act. Ellie killing a pregnant woman was horrifying, even though it was clearly just an excuse for Neil to demonize her, but she wasn't aware of the pregnancy. And after she sees it, she starts hyperventilating, throwing up, and her hearing fades out. She was clearly horrified and showed signs of immediate regret. Do you really think that Abby would have felt the same way if Lev didn't stop her from slitting Dina's throat? Well, considering the satisfying tone when she says good, I'm pretty sure the answer is no. Abby is objectively heinous and potentially evil. Her actions are completely irredeemable to the point that even after seeing her side of the story, we don't care. Her daily life, her friends, and her father don't matter because she has no good qualities. This is a character that we want to see the main protagonist defeat. Someone who by all means is not somebody that the audience should side with. And to see the game go out of its way to glorify her as the just character, while demonizing the protagonist from the first game that we actually care about, is absolutely horrible. You remember how I said earlier that the story doesn't work as a cycle of revenge plot because the story is really biased in favor of Abby? That's the feeling that you get throughout the whole time that you're playing as her, and even during the game's prologue. Abby's portion of the game was made specifically for people who disagree with Joel's decision at the end of the first game. It acts in a morally absolute way by killing him slowly and horribly in front of Ellie, and then turning Ellie into the villain for wanting to avenge his death. And it actively goes against the theme of the first game because it doesn't allow you to come to your own conclusions about Joel's decision. Even if you want to make the argument that there's two sides to every story, Abby didn't bother to learn Joel's, or even Ellie's. She just straight up kills Joel without hesitation, and then threatens to slit the throat of someone who had nothing to do with anything just to get back at Ellie. All of this put together just turns Abby into a huge Mary Sue. She's the morally just character whose side we're supposed to see and root for, while Ellie gets turned into the villain. She's bigger and stronger than Ellie, having the same survival skills with practically no flaws, and she's justified in killing Joel and getting her revenge while Ellie isn't. She gets to play as both the aggressor and the victim in this revenge story with no strings attached. Why? Because she has a sad backstory that's supposed to make her complex? That just makes it more emotionally manipulative. And that's the problem. Abby's campaign is so painfully manipulative, using every possible cheap and artificial tactic that it can muster, instead of actual characterization to get us to side with Abby instead of Ellie. Still don't believe me? Take a look at this footage of Ellie killing Abby's dog and Abby and her dad saving that zebra back to back. Ellie kills animals in her campaign, but Abby and her father save animals. Doesn't that make you want to side with Abby? Doesn't that make her sympathetic after she tried to slit a pregnant woman's throat? Of course it doesn't! Even if they wanted to do the whole dead parent being the hero's motivation thing, it still doesn't work because they did nothing with it. In The Lion King, Mufasa didn't die just for the hell of it. He had a properly established relationship with his son, teaching him about the responsibilities of being a leader and ruling over a kingdom. His death serves an organic purpose in the story that supports the lesson that Simba has to learn by the end of the film. Abby's father dies just to give Neil Druckmann an excuse to kill off Joel, and his screen time is so short-lived that we don't get a chance to establish a connection with him, and we don't get to see why his relationship with Abby is supposed to be important. Both characters go through some really shitty stuff, but it's made very apparent which one is less sympathetic and which one the story is being biased towards. It's like they took the grounded setting established in the first game and placed Abby in it specifically to break the rules, and it's for these reasons that she's already become one of the most hated video game characters of all time in such a short amount of time. Nothing about her is salvageable because her very existence was made for the purpose of spiting fans of the first game. She's nothing but a projection for Neil Druckmann's hatred for Joel in this game. Hell, look at this box art for the game's special edition. Joel isn't even on the fucking cover. But do you know who is? Abby, the piece of shit that nobody asked for or gives a shit about that was shoved in the very last minute to meet some kind of messed up agenda. Even the way Abby lets them live, which is supposed to be an act of mercy, just feels forced. She literally murdered her way across the country, destroying everything in her path, and yet she lets these two live because of plot protection. It's so obvious that she's just gonna come back later to finish the job, so why are you letting her live? This is such novice writing material, and to see it come from such a highly anticipated AAA title is embarrassing. And maybe, just maybe, all of this stupid shit might not have been so bad. I dare even say it might have been worth it had the ending not been the biggest fuck you that I've ever seen in a video game. I'm not even kidding, it's worse than Mass Effect 3. So here's how it goes. Tommy and Marlene get divorced after losing his eye because, yeah, this game wasn't depressing enough, so you'd might as well take away Tommy's happy ending as well. He tells Ellie where to find Abby, and later that night, she decides to go, leaving Dina heartbroken and betrayed. Abby and Lev are looking for the Fireflies, but they get kidnapped by raiders, so now Ellie has to go rescue them. Which is stupid since your entire end goal is Abby's death. If you really want Abby dead so bad, then this is the perfect revenge. Leave her to die a slow and torturous death by these raiders. But no, because it's not revenge unless Ellie deals the killing blow. Why is Ellie so stupid in this game? Anyway, she kills her way across the lair and eventually she finds them. And here it is, the perfect opportunity. Abby has no way out of this. She's tied to a pole with no chance of escape. All Ellie has to do is take out her gun, shoot her in the head, and walk away. What does she do? She cuts her down. Really, you're just gonna let her go? Hell, you didn't even need to shoot her, you could've just walked away and leave her to starve to death. What was the point of leaving Dina and coming all the way out here if you're just gonna let her go? If you want her dead, then leave her for dead. Well, I digress. So they escape with Lev and get to the lifeboats, but then Ellie gets a vision of Joel and decides that she wants to kill Abby again, threatening to slit Lev's throat, which is hypocritical considering you told Abby to spare Dina, who had nothing to do with anything, and now you're doing the same thing. Fuck, if you really want to stab Abby to death, then why didn't you just stab her in the brain or in the back of the throat when her back was turned? There was no need for this grabbing her by the hair and pushing her into the water shit. Hell, you still got your backpack and all your weapons in the boat, so why don't you just shoot her? You've been presented with multiple ways to kill Abby at this point, so why don't you just take advantage of them? But, oh well. We finally have the showdown with Abby, and after all the bullshit we've had to sit through, after all the stupid writing choices and continuity errors, we can finally kill this woman and just be done with it. Ellie starts to drown her, but not before she gets her left ring and little finger bitten off, and we finally have Ellie getting her revenge by killing Abby, just to pussy out at the last possible second and let her leave with Lev. Why? Because she has a flashback of Joel which leads her to believe that he wouldn't want her to kill Abby.
This is bullshit.
Are you fucking kidding me? After everything you put me through, you had Ellie come all this way to kill Abby just to not kill Abby. And really, she doesn't kill her because she has a flashback of Joel. That's the reason. There is so much wrong with this ass-pull of a twist that I could write an entire book dissecting it. You're telling me that after the hundreds of people and dozens of dogs that Ellie killed just to get to this point, she can't kill the person who actually killed Joel. Hours and hours of mass slaughter just to let her go at the last possible second. This is like if John Wick killed everyone except the guy who actually killed his dog. Or if Kill Bill didn't kill Bill. What kind of fucking revenge story has the main character kill literally everyone except the villain who actually did the deed? Are you telling me that with the gallons of blood on her hands, Ellie is only now feeling bad about killing someone? After she smashed a woman's skull in with a pipe? After she killed a pregnant woman? After she butchered dozens of dogs that had nothing to do with Joel's death? Fuck, you're actually gonna let her go after she bit off your fingers? If somebody bit off my fingers, I would've killed them without hesitation. And hey, remember how Abby spared your life and you came back to try and kill her? What's stopping her from doing the same thing? If anything, Abby should have just killed Ellie right then and there. She's already shown how she's the type of person to kill you when your back is turned and too dangerous to be left alive. So why are you leaving her alive? This is like the second time that your past came back to haunt you, so why are you giving her a third chance to do it? And the more you think about it, the worse it gets. So apparently, the guy who gave a sincere apology to Ellie and even made her high-quality steak sandwiches is unforgivable because he called her a bad lesbian slur word. But you can forgive the psychotic bitch who brutally killed Joel in front of you, bit off your fingers, and threatened to slit the throat of your pregnant girlfriend? What double standard backwards bullshit is that? I don't care if he called you the C word, just take the damn sandwiches. This is like demonizing a kid who stole your lunch money but gives it back to you later than forgiving the home invader who killed your parents. Oh, but he called her a no-no word. And Anita Sarkeesian would never forgive a man who acts mean to a woman. And you know what? Fuck the idea that Ellie having a flashback of Joel would stop her from wanting to kill Abby. If anything, that would have made her just want to keep drowning her. So a flashback of Joel makes you want to kill Abby, but then suddenly a flashback of Joel makes you not want to kill Abby. The Star Wars sequel trilogy was more consistent than you. And for that matter, after everything that happened in this game, are you seriously telling me that Joel wouldn't want Ellie to kill Abby? You think he'd actually pull a revenge his bad speech after all the crap he experienced over 25 years? No! This woman beat him to death in front of you while you begged for his life and threatened to slit your girlfriend's throat. Joel would have given Ellie the complete okay to finish her off. Saying that Joel wouldn't want Ellie to kill her is highly out of character. You're basically telling that he would approve of the slaughter of everyone else that Ellie killed, but not the killing of the person who actually killed him. Ellie has absolutely no reason to spare Abby. Every time they cross paths, she has been heinous and monstrous to her and her family. So seeing her actually spare her is the most plot-contrived and out-of-character moment in this entire game. And what makes this writing decision so strange and completely out of nowhere is that they did nothing to build up Ellie's change of heart. Her character never progresses from being obsessed with revenge, and she never gets a single moment with Abby that would give her any sign that she's deserving of mercy. Ellie's campaign strictly focused on her slaughtering people left and right across the country like it was nothing, and there's never a moment where she reflects on herself or practices any sort of mercy. With the way that Ellie was characterized throughout the game, she wouldn't have spared Abby. Having her learn only now that revenge isn't worth it makes the entire plot completely collapse on itself when she's already crossed so many lines to get to this point. And not only does Ellie not get a chance to introspect on Abby, but the player doesn't either. It literally begins with her brutally murdering Joel in front of Ellie, which makes you want to hate her, and her half of the story never develops her character in any meaningful way. Any sort of humanizing they tried to give her was already tossed out the window, and any they try to get back for her is made unacceptable the second she threatened to slit Dina's throat, with no regret, no remorse, and no shame. There is literally no reason to root for her at any point in this entire fucking game. And in spite of having virtually every single reason to kill her at this point, they still give her a free pass with the plot continuing to be biased in favor of her. Ellie never gets her cathartic moment in this entire story, in spite of the fact that seeing her get her cathartic moment was the exact reason that anyone paid money to finish this game. And by letting Abby live, this entire journey was entirely pointless. What was the point of anything that happened in this game if Ellie doesn't kill Abby? We achieved absolutely nothing in this 20+ hour experience because our end goal is made unobtainable by the story itself. This is such a horrible non-ending where so many hours of mass killing was all for nothing because Abby gets to live. And having it because Ellie got a random flashback of Joel makes no sense. It's completely lazy. One of the oldest tricks in the book placed in a situation where it doesn't fit, painting the game with an extremely childish sense of morality. Oh sure, Ellie killed hundreds of people and their dogs, but at least she didn't kill Abby and chose to not take revenge. Fuck that shit. We paid for a revenge story, we should get a revenge story. If you want to make a revenge story, make a revenge story. Don't back out of it, you spineless cowards. And it all leads up to the final scene with one more middle finger before it's all over. Ellie returns to the barn and finds that it's completely empty, with Dina taking her baby and all of her things. She walks around for a while and tries to play her guitar, but can't do it anymore because she lost her fingers. And after all that emotional torture, pain, and misery, it finally ends with her walking into the next room and shooting herself in the head. Okay, that's not what really happened, but it might as well have. So, after all that shit, Abby wins and Ellie loses. Abby gets to have revenge and gets to save a friend, while Ellie loses everything and ends up alone and miserable. She never gets her closure with Joel, and in the process she ends up having her worst fear realized. Completely by herself and having nothing to be happy about. What a horrifying game. Okay, so at this point, you get the gist of it. Abby is horrible, Joel's death is horrible, Ellie being a revenge-obsessed sociopath is horrible, the ending is horrible, the retconning of the message of the first game is horrible, and the revenge story they went with is horrible. But you know what? These were things that people already figured out because so much of the game got leaked before it was released. Granted, the added context helps to show what made the plot so horrible, but when you get down to it, these are small potatoes. The ending, the Abby stuff, Joel's death, Ellie's characterization, these are not the problem. They're factors of the problem. In reality, all of these things serve as smaller pieces to a much bigger one. And that bigger problem is that in spite of this game being titled The Last of Us Part 2, this game feels absolutely nothing like a Last of Us game. The Last of Us wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about brutal violence or hatred. It was about survival, and looking for something that gives your life purpose. It was about living in a post-apocalypse and finding the good in it that motivated you to keep going. It was special in how it focused on relationships between people instead of the generic fighting zombies while looking for a cure plot. And what helped it stand out was the way that it handled its characters. It had a very subtle way of developing them and did so without turning everyone into a depressed piece of shit. And even when it had its darker moments, the game wasn't outright nihilistic. It explored the post-apocalypse in a way that showed how the world can be complicated and messed up, but there's still good in it that's worth living for. It was crafted in a way that explored how different people react to different things. Not just the characters in the game, but also the people playing it. People still talk about this game 7 years later specifically because of how it affected them. When I said the game was timeless, I meant it because you could play it years later and still recognize what it was about. There were plenty of times where the characters made you feel happy and the tone was evened out, so it could properly capture the hopelessness and danger of a post-apocalypse while still having something meaningful to say. It was a real experience to behold, and it was all leading up to one solitary moment.
Come on, hurry up! You see this? Shh, don't scare it.
I won't.
What are you doing?
It's all right. Come here. Hey. Hurry up. Go on.
Hey there. So fucking cool. Aw, where's it off to? Here, come on, let's go.
Slow down, kiddo.
Come on.
Whenever I take the time to replay this game and get to this moment in the story, I always put my controller down and just listen to the comforting music while taking in the scenery alongside Joel and Ellie. It's a very special scene where the lighthearted side of this world fully shines through. There's still beauty and meaning to it beyond the presence of humans. It's a real moment of harmony that made you completely forget about the sadness and death that followed you throughout the game. One that just lets you relax and enjoy life however short-lived it may be. And it's moments like this that made The Last of Us so special. It was more than just surviving a zombie apocalypse and brutal violence. It's a story about life. Life isn't gonna go the way you want it to, but you can still find happiness on the road that it takes you. You can still find things like pleasure, comfort, and people who change you for the better and support you no matter what. It was a story about Joel's second chance at life, trying to live again after he lost Sarah, and how his relationship with Ellie gave him that second chance. And his journey was so well crafted with so much depth added to his character that it made it interesting to experience. It was actually a lot more lighthearted than people give it credit for, with a story that shows just what the medium of video games can be capable of. The Last of Us Part 2 goes against this entirely. Throughout the entire story, there's never a moment where the player is allowed to take in the scenery or establish a personal connection with the game's world. There's never a moment where you're allowed to see the characters interact without being bombarded with misery. And there's never a moment where you see the lighter side of this dark world. It's a miserable experience from beginning to end. And the gameplay itself is so sadistic and grim while encouraging you to be as violent as possible that it doesn't incorporate the gameplay in a way that supports the story organically. It's just an excuse to be as violent as possible. This whole cycle of revenge mumbo-jumbo and killing every last one of them is not why people love The Last of Us. If anything, it's the exact opposite. It's a huge step backwards while being as tired and cliche as possible, and it doesn't fit the tone of the first game at all. It's like if Frozen had a sequel where raiders destroy Arendelle and kill Anna, and Elsa goes on a violent journey to avenge her death. Instead of further developing the characters and seeing where the story takes them as they get older, it just focuses on Ellie and Abby turning into serial killers. For a series that was so highly celebrated for its nuanced storytelling, The Last of Us Part 2 has nothing meaningful to say. It doesn't teach you anything about revenge or how bad it is, and instead mishandles its themes so badly that it ends up glorifying the very things that it claims to be fighting against. In spite of trying to tell you that violence is bad, it spends the entire game glorifying violence. And it's so heavily drenched in this grim material that after a while, it stops getting a reaction from you. They clearly meant for this to be shocking, but it becomes so repetitive that it just feels empty and hollow. By the time you get to the story's final moments, you'll have already become so desensitized by the excessive violence and the gritty behavior of the characters that you end up feeling nothing. You don't feel anything for Ellie, Abby, Tommy, Dina, Jesse, Lev, or any of the people that Ellie slaughtered along the way. It constantly barrages you with bleakness and misery to the point that you just feel nothing due to being exposed to the exact same garbage for 20 hours straight. Making you feel depressed and miserable doesn't make you want to keep playing, it makes you want to stop playing. And the mood whiplash is so jumbled and so extreme that the tone doesn't even work. You got Ellie in a snowball fight with some kids right before all the horrifying stuff that happens in the prologue. You got her playing Take On Me on the guitar right before she goes back to slaughtering people in gruesome ways. You got a whole section where you raise a baby immediately after the villain threatened to slit your pregnant girlfriend's throat, and have that followed up by an entire ending sequence where you slaughter your way through a mansion and set the building on fire with people screaming in agony in the background. There's no consistency to any of it. When it comes to this type of darker storytelling, you need to have it properly punctuated with lightheartedness, or else it just becomes boring and unpleasant. But this game has so much bleakness and gritty cruelty left and right that there's no room for any meaningful lightheartedness. And since you spend half the game playing as Joel's murderer, that just makes it more unsettling. It never tries to have an even tone like the first one, it's just depressing for the sake of being depressing. People naturally become desensitized to this stuff after being exposed to it for too long, and The Last of Us Part 2 spends so much time trying to horrify you that you feel more annoyed than intimidated. This game isn't shocking, it's pretentious, with no satisfaction. Not a single moment in this entire game came as close to having the same gratification as that moment of Joel and Ellie watching giraffes. I've seen my fair share of revenge stories in my life, some of them being darker and more violent than others, but they still manage to have more meaning and hold more of a point than this train wreck of a sequel. One defense that I've seen people make for this game is how The Last of Us Part 2 isn't about revenge. It's about forgiveness. One of the reasons Ellie is angry at Abby is because she killed Joel before she got around to forgiving him. She's angry at herself because she never got to tell Joel that she forgives him for choosing to save her over letting humanity have a cure. But here's the problem. If The Last of Us Part 2 is about forgiveness and not revenge, why the fuck is Abby in this game? Why does the prologue focus on her tracking Joel down and killing him in retribution for her father? Why is half the game spent playing as Ellie, tracking her down to kill her and avenge Joel? Why does Abby's campaign involve tracking Ellie down to the theater to kill her for killing her teammates and her dog? Why does Ellie choose to abandon her wife and child and decide that tracking Abby is more important? Why is every single second of this game's marketing focused on Ellie traveling the country in search of the people who wronged her? You can't just say that this game is about forgiveness and not revenge when literally 75% of it is built around revenge. People making this defense say it's because of that final flashback where Ellie tries to find closure with Joel, but that only happens at the last possible second of the last chapter of the story. If you wanted this game to be about Ellie forgiving Joel for lying to her, then cut out all the shit with Abby and rewrite the story to focus on that, instead of having it happen through inconsequential flashbacks. When people heard about The Last of Us getting a sequel, they figured it would be about Ellie finding out Joel lied to her and there would be a slow, gradual build-up to it. In this game, it just happens randomly in a flashback. Hell, making the second game entirely about Ellie in conflict with Joel would have been an amazing concept. Have Joel address his decision and understand that it affected more people than just him and Ellie. Their journey would have been one of reconciliation. It would be a darker story while still feeling like a proper continuation and carrying over the themes of the first. But no, they just had to do a shitty revenge plot where 90% of the characters are shitty people with no likability. And ultimately, this is The Last of Us Part 2's biggest failing. With the way that it's written, it simply doesn't work as a sequel. Obviously, some people are gonna make the excuse that we should try to see this as its own thing, but The Last of Us Part 2 is not supposed to be seen as its own thing. It's not a reboot, it's not a remake, it's not a spin-off. It's a sequel. It's meant to be seen as a direct continuation to the story of the first game. and with every decision that it makes, it fails to justify its themes and its very existence as a sequel. The Last of Us is supposed to be about Joel and Ellie, but we get no scenes of them together while Joel is still alive, and instead we have to play as his murderer. And the complete contempt that this game has for Joel is absolutely outrageous. He's killed in the first 2 hours in the most violent and depressing way possible, he was used as a tool by the marketing to lie to people about the actual plot, and he only ever appears in flashbacks that have no weight to the story. Respecting your protagonist and the audience attached to them is an absolute priority when writing a sequel, and there's practically no sign of respect for Joel in this game. The second they had Abby kill him, it created a huge disconnect between the game and fans of the first one. Because even if you didn't agree with Joel's decision, he was still a key character. He was an important figure to the story and should have gotten a more meaningful death. And then there's the disrespect they gave Ellie. Not only is she not justified in getting her revenge, turned into the villain for Abby's story, characterized as a serial killer obsessed with revenge, and not allowed to kill the person who took everything away from her, but her worst fears are completely realized and present front and center. Remember in the first game how she said that her worst fear was ending up completely alone? Well, look at what happens in the game's final moments. Her father is gone, her uncle is divorced and miserable, her wife left her, she took everything with her including their child, she has absolutely no one to comfort her, and to top it all off, she can't even play guitar anymore. One of her most treasured gifts from Joel, and she can't even have that because Abby bit off her fingers. The worst possible thing that can happen to Ellie is your reward for playing this game all the way to the end. And everything about the way Neil Druckmann directed it was designed to get to that point in the most miserable and depressing way possible. From Joel's death being as graphic as it was, to making you control Abby as you beat the shit out of her, to Dina leaving her, to making Ellie's inability to play her guitar the final action needed to get to the end credits. My god, I thought Mortal Kombat 11 was bad with the way it treated Sindel. This game is the epitome of taking every single avenue possible to spite fans of beloved characters. This is like if Beauty and the Beast had a sequel where Gaston has a relative who kills Beast in revenge and Belle loses all her friends and family and ends up alone at the end of the movie. And making us play as the bitch responsible for all this is just rubbing salt in the wound. Any chance you had at making this cycle of revenge story work was tossed into the trash can the second you started it with her killing Joel in front of his daughter, and then deciding that she gets to live and suffer no consequences for it. And throughout the game, you just decided to make her character more and more hateable. She's never punished, never redeemed, and practically gets rewarded by having the pleasure of finishing her mission to track down the Fireflies with Lev. I seriously cannot for the life of me figure out what the hell this game is trying to do with Abby. It's honestly hard to get a beat on what she's supposed to be. Her character is so inconsistent, so erratical, and so indecisive that you can't even appreciate her as a standalone figure. It's like they had a whole bunch of ideas and personalities they had in mind for her and just couldn't seem to pick one. And they don't even do that much to make her sympathetic because she's got everything that you could possibly want in a zombie apocalypse. She's living a very comfortable life with good food, bodybuilding equipment, electricity, and friends who look out for her. And the constant back and forth they do with Abby in this game is so frustrating and forced that you can practically see the emotional manipulation tactics coming from a mile away. It wants to make her as sickening as possible so we'd want to see Ellie get her revenge, but it also wants to make her tragic and sympathetic, which a lot of fucking idiots who ate this game up just bought as, I have a sad backstory, feel bad for me, and doesn't bother to consider the fact that those two don't mesh. Did it never occur to people that The Last of Us was about Joel and Ellie for a reason, and that demonizing them while making Abby the good guy would be a stupid idea? Hell, the part 2 in this title doesn't even make any sense because it's not about Joel and Ellie. It's about Abby while Ellie gets shit on. If they really wanted to tell a revenge is bad plot, the least they could have done was give the player a choice. Give us the choice to kill Abby and give us 2 different endings depending on player decision. If Ellie spares Abby, Dina is waiting for her at the barn and helps her to play guitar with her lost fingers. If she does kill Abby, then Ellie ends up alone. Even Mass Effect 3, for all of its massive flaws, at least gives you something resembling a choice. And as a video game, that is one of the worst things that you can do to the player. Any sort of player choice is completely taken away from you because it wants Abby to win by any means necessary. You don't get to do anything meaningful as Joel before he's killed, and then spend half of the game playing as the character that they wouldn't admit was the new protagonist in any of the marketing. Yeah, didn't Neil Druckmann say it was gonna be about Joel and Ellie? And wasn't Dina the character who was supposed to die during the prologue?
My morning sun is the drug that brings me to the childhood I lost, replaced by fear.
Oh, but I guess they wanted to keep the fact that Joel dies in the prologue and that you'd be forced to spend the whole game sympathizing with his killer a big secret to subvert your expectations. Fuck, the marketing for The Rise of Skywalker was more honest. At least they had the decency to show Palpatine in the trailers. And all for the sake of chasing social justice brownie points by making the trans figure into the character we're supposed to root for. You really seem to believe that making the character trans-friendly automatically means that you've made a meaningful statement. But the only statement I see is that you've clearly chosen to disrespect fans, shit all over beloved characters, and even went so far as to abuse your own employees by making them work crunch hours just to get this god-awful thing out as quickly as possible. I still can't begin to fathom the reasoning behind the choices that were made for this plot. It is so insensitive, disrespectful, and spiteful towards people who cared even remotely about the first game. Anyone who cared even slightly about these characters and the message they helped carry with their story. After all the hardships he went through, it felt so good to see Joel getting some kind of happy ending with Ellie. Seeing him petting giraffes, seeing that there's still beauty in the world, getting a second chance to be a good father, giving Ellie a good life that he could never give to Sarah, just to end up getting bludgeoned to death with a golf club. It felt good seeing Ellie finding peace in her new life with Joel even though she was unsure about the truth behind the Fireflies. Even if she finds out the truth later, they could have worked around to her forgiving him, just to watch him die horribly and then end up with nothing at the end of the game. You spend the entire first game, the DLC, and half of this game getting invested in Ellie because you want to see her grow and become more defined and independent. We want to see her go through a meaningful arc where she comes out on top. We don't want to beat the shit out of her while playing as some rando that we never met and don't sympathize with. There's no relationship between Abby and the player before she kills Joel, or even before the game switches perspectives. And even then, the time we spend with Abby is completely overridden by the time we spend with Joel and Ellie. Forcing us to play as this character with no warning is just wrong on so many levels. This kind of bait and switch only works when the story is able to come up with a good enough excuse for it, but the game never presents anything like that. I mean, what exactly was the motivation behind this? There's no commentary to the way you switch between Ellie and Abby, it just comes down to subverting expectations without the subversion having any meaning to it. If this was supposed to address how Joel's actions at the end of the first game have consequences, there were like 100 better ways you could have done it. If you want to do a revenge story, that's fine, but at least have the decency to do it right, and in a way that doesn't act as a disservice to these characters. A cycle of revenge story only works when it involves important characters that the audience has a relationship with. It doesn't work when you only have a relationship with one side of the conflict. We have no relationship with Abby and her father, so their side of the story is just meaningless. And because they aim for Abby to be hated by having her kill Joel in such a selfish way, no one is going to sympathize with her. And you want us to do that while shoving representation down our throats. I'm sorry, but last I checked, having a 200-pound trans character beating the shit out of 2 90-pound lesbians is not good representation, especially when you're making the trans character into the villain of the lesbian story. At best it makes you look like an idiot, and at worst, it makes your work come across as gross and horrifying. The selling point of The Last of Us was how it developed Joel and Ellie, and this sequel completely fucks that up in the absolute worst ways they could have done it. It actively punishes you for going attached to them over the last 7 years, and its reasons for why it chose to do this don't make the slightest of sense. And it ultimately feels pointless as it's designed specifically to make you as miserable as possible. It constantly hits you with misery to the point that you just simply stop feeling affected by it. It doesn't convey any feelings because you'll be desensitized to it by the time the credits start rolling, and it's not supported by anything meaningful. It's just cruelty on top of cruelty on top of cruelty, and there's no satisfaction to that. And it doesn't even succeed at creating sequel bait for a third game because it failed to deliver a satisfying story on its own. Who the fuck is gonna want a Last of Us Part 3 after a second entry this horribly put together? Remember during the final chapter of the first game how Ellie said that after everything they've been through it can't be for nothing? Well, sorry kiddo, because it was all for nothing. Joel doesn't get a second chance to be a good father because he gets brutally murdered in the first 2 hours of the sequel, and he only appears in flashbacks that have no effect on the plot. Joel didn't win at the end of the first game because the character who ends up killing him turned out to be the daughter of that random surgeon, which is lazy writing in every way that you look at it. It's like in Death Note where Light defeated L just to get fucked over later by Mello and Nier, only somehow 1,000 times worse. And Ellie realizes her worst fears of ending up alone because Abby took everything away from her. She's constantly praised left and right by the narrative and is portrayed as always in the right in spite of how obviously wrong she is. And it divorces Ellie's role from the overall story by having it be about about Joel getting killed by a random person because that random person was related to another random person he killed. Hell, it might as well not even be set in a zombie apocalypse anymore. The very setting itself has been made completely pointless because the zombies are just a background element to get around in gameplay. You could remove the infected from this game entirely and it would be the exact same plot. The zombies in this zombie apocalypse don't hold any weight anymore. It doesn't bother to build its setting because it's so asphyxiated on revenge, it doesn't develop any of the new characters because they get dismissed as quickly as they're introduced, and it goes against the first game by completely retconning its message. Now the message is that saving a loved one from being pointlessly sacrificed for a cure that most likely wasn't even going to work while said loved one wasn't even given a choice is morally wrong. All of Joel's character development and the themes of the first game are completely tossed into the trash heap for a twist that doesn't benefit him or Ellie. It makes the exact same mistakes as The Last Jedi, Game of Thrones, and Steven Universe by subverting expectations to appear deep and complex without having any sense to it. And in the process, it goes against everything the first game stood for. And in all the time that I spent talking about this game, I don't even think I've gotten to the most offensive part yet. As if it wasn't enough that you turned Joel into an idiot, then killed him in the most tasteless way possible. As if it wasn't enough that you turned Ellie into an unlikable monster who ends up with nothing. As if it wasn't enough that you made us brutally murder dogs in gross and horrifying ways. As if it wasn't enough that you went against the message of the first game. As if it wasn't enough that you actively lied to people through that false advertising, deliberately planning to deceive people with those older models of Joel and Ellie. As if it wasn't enough that you forced us to sympathize with one of the most despicable pieces of shit that I've ever seen in a video game, you had to render the emotional weight of Sarah's death entirely meaningless. I know there were a great deal of people who cried during this scene because it was so powerful. It was an opening that perfectly set the tone, letting you know how dark this game was gonna get with a father's worst fear being realized. His life has completely fallen apart before him. The community he grew accustomed to has been destroyed, and his child died in his arms. And unlike Joel's death, Sarah's had actual meaning to it. Even if you weren't emotionally impacted by her death, you could tell how important it was to the story. The end of Sarah's life was the beginning of Joel's character arc, making it the most pivotal moment in the first game. A broken man who has nothing left to live for except his own survival. And yet, in spite of becoming a hardened survivor, there was still a part of him that was driven by Sarah. He still wears that broken watch she gave him on his birthday, a clear sign that he's not surviving just for himself. The game never portrays him as a hero, but as a father in mourning, and it's that exact sense of loss that keeps him going. It wasn't just Ellie motivating him, it was Sarah the entire time. Remember that scene where they escape the museum and Joel talks to Ellie about the view of the city, and then slowly brings himself to look down to his watch? Joel didn't want to admit it, but in that moment he began to see Sarah inside of Ellie, and as they went onward he continued to see similarities between the two. Joel sees so much of Sarah inside of Ellie that he truly sees her as another chance to be a good father. He doesn't use Ellie as a replacement for Sarah. Rather, he sees Ellie as someone who would have been really good friends with her. Someone who would have been a really good sister to her. And it's all that detail that makes you think about this line Ellie utters in the epilogue.
You're such an asshole.
I'm not trying to.
I was supposed to die in that hospital. My life would have fucking mattered. But you took that from me.
All this time, Ellie believed that her life would only matter if she got to give herself up for a cure. But what she doesn't know is that it wasn't needed. She wanted her life to matter, but it already did. To Joel, her life mattered just as much as Sarah's. That's why he saved her and chose to not sacrifice her. And he stands by his decision because he's always gonna choose his child over the world. If it was Sarah, he would have done the exact same thing. Sarah was practically the most important character of all because her death was the catalyst that drove the entire story. Her memory was the very thing that defined Joel for the last 25 years and influenced all of his decisions in the first game. Pushing Ellie away out of fear of losing a second daughter, comforting her after she kills David, opening up to her at the university, choosing to accept Tess's pleas to deliver her to Tommy against his better judgment, all leading to his final decision to save her over humanity. Sarah was the glue that tied everything together. Joel's relationship with Ellie, Ellie's growth and maturity, the fractured relationship between Joel and Tommy, the way the plot was paced, the scene with the giraffes, and everything in between. Sarah died in the first 15 minutes, and yet in that short amount of time, her presence in the game had so much meaning to it. If it wasn't for her, The Last of Us wouldn't have the story that it has. It wouldn't have been so beloved, and the game wouldn't be one of the most celebrated in recent years. All of that was made possible by Sarah. And what does that mean now? Where does all of that meaning go now that we've seen where it leads? Joel is dead and buried, Tommy is single and miserable, Ellie is alone with nothing to live for, and the person responsible for all of it gets to walk away. Everything that all of these characters went through was for nothing. Sarah didn't add meaning to their lives because any meaning their lives might have been given has fallen victim to horrible writing and SJW propaganda. Sarah didn't give Joel a second chance because that second chance was abruptly taken away. Sarah didn't help Ellie find a better life because she became obsessed with revenge just to not take revenge and end up with nothing. Sarah didn't help mend Tommy and Joel's relationship because one ends up dead and the other is left unhappy, complete with a missing eye and barely able to walk. Sarah didn't die for a reason, and contribute to a better future for any of these characters because they all ended up defeated or dead. Sarah died just so that her father's character development would mean nothing in the end. Sarah died for nothing. At this point, you might as well act like the first game doesn't even exist, because everything that happens in it, with the exception of Joel killing Abby's father, has been made completely irrelevant in the face of this new saga of Ellie versus the She-Hulk. I just feel so horrible for The Last of Us fandom right now. I don't feel sorry for the people defending this abomination and giving it anything higher than a 4, but the people who genuinely just wanted to see a proper continuation to the story of Joel and Ellie after waiting 7 years, I can't even imagine just how depressed, sickened, or awful they must feel, and how pissed off they must be that Neil Druckmann just fucked them over this badly. Never have I seen a sequel that so thoroughly hates you for being a fan of the original and just wants to destroy all the happy memories that you made with it by any means necessary. But no, apparently this game is a groundbreaking masterpiece because it dared to tell a dark and gritty story about how revenge is bad, despite the fact that Sharon Spell already did it over 40 years ago, and much, much better, might I add. And all those salty fanboys of the first game who are just angry at this one but don't know why they're angry because it got leaked and they saw Joel getting killed in the first 2 hours by a random character who turned out to be the daughter of a random NPC that no one gave a shit about 7 years ago? Yeah, let's just ignore any and all complaints that they may have, regardless if there's a point to those complaints. And don't give me that shit about how I need to directly play this game in order to review it. The Last of Us was a story-driven experience. It was always a story-driven experience. No one liked The Last of Us because you could punch people, shoot them from cover, craft items, or move objects around to complete tedious puzzles. They liked it because of Joel and Ellie. They liked it because of their journey across the country and the bonds they made along the way. And this sequel just shits all over that in every possible way. Regardless of the quality of the gameplay, the story is still shit. And people played The Last of Us specifically for its story. This was simply not a good narrative, and not only does it make no sense on its own, but it completely dismantles the characters and the themes that made the franchise what it is. This is a soulless game through and through, with no love put into it and its creation having no sense of heart. It was made specifically to milk money out of The Last of Us fans and chase after social justice warrior brownie points. It tries so desperately to be woke while holding so much contempt for the fan base. With its abundance of anti-consumer practices, slave-driving people who made the damn thing, and that abhorrent false advertising that was made specifically to trick people. Every time I thought this game couldn't possibly get any worse, it managed to surprise me with something new, and it just got worse and worse as time went on. Even the cover art for the game has nothing meaningful to say. I mean, really compare it to the cover art for the first game. What do you see here? Joel and Ellie wandering the wilderness, traveling across the country to an uncertain destination, walking through a deserted city surrounded by plant growth with the sun setting on them. The two look back with a sense of caution, aware of the danger following them but still pushing themselves forward. This cover immediately captures your interest as it manages to tell so much with one single image. It adds a sense of mystery and adventure to the game, making you wonder what journey is in store for anyone who picks it up. Now take a look at this box art. What do you see here? Just Ellie looking angry with blood on her face, in a completely blank background with no detail whatsoever. What exactly does this tell you about the game? What does it tell you about the story or the characters? Just that they're angry and that it has violence in it. This doesn't add a sense of mystery and adventure that intrigues your interest. This just looks like some sort of try-hard edgelord artwork, and they chose that over something more expressive. You could have just taken a piece of fan art and make that the cover, and it would have told you more about the game than this angry face Ellie's got. Everything surrounding this game is just a spit in the face of not just The Last of Us fans, but gamers in general. A product that just wants to make you feel miserable while scamming you out of your money, all while scarring the reputation of the first game. Neil Druckmann went on record saying that The Last of Us Part 2 was about hatred. Well, mission accomplished, Mr. Druckmann. Everyone hates your game, and everyone hates you. You lied to people with dishonest promotional material. You screwed over YouTubers with fake copyright claims because they dared to discuss the leaks in your abortion of a story. You completely changed the personalities of beloved characters for the sake of creating artificial conflict. You killed off Joel in the most disrespectful way you could have done it. You fucked over Ellie by taking away everything she cared about and fought for. You forced us to play as the villain for half the game in a poor attempt to make us feel sympathy for her. You made us kill dogs in disgusting and horrifying ways after you said we wouldn't have to. You made the zombies in this zombie apocalypse story out of place and irrelevant. You made us watch an explicit, uncensored sex scene in spite of Sony's hypocritical stance on censorship. You shoved representation and bulking women in people's faces to get extra brownie points from Anita Sarkeesian. You gave the villain of the story the only happy ending while every other character is brutally murdered or left with nothing. 7 years, and this was the best you could come up with. You're a disgrace to video game development and the gaming community at large. Your presence is a plague on a medium that millions of people have expressed so much passion for. You could even care less if people's health is put in jeopardy just to shit out your turd of a game as quickly as possible. You have no respect for the art form that you represented with this game. The people who fell in love with the story of Joel and Ellie, the people who just wanted to see where it was gonna keep taking them, and even Joel and Ellie themselves, they all deserved better than what you did to them. You lying, money-grubbing piece of shit. Fuck this, I'm just gonna go play some SpongeBob SquarePants. At least that didn't make me feel like killing myself.